My name is Aidan, 33 years old, and the craftsman house my grandfather Harold left me meant everything. It represented his legacy, our bond, and my future. So imagine my shock when I returned from a business trip to find my own mother had changed all the locks. Standing on the porch of my own inherited home, I heard her cold voice through the door. "You have nothing here anymore." What she didn't know was that her secret $590,000 deal to sell my house was about to come crashing down around her. I never imagined I'd have to legally battle my own mother for what was rightfully mine. Before I dive into this painful story, let me know where you all are watching from in the comments. If you've ever had family betray you over money, hit that like button and subscribe to show support. Trust me, what happened next in this nightmare will shock you just as much as it did me. To understand why my mother stealing my inherited house cut so deep, you need to know the full story of our family. My parents divorced when I was just 10 years old. My mother, Laura, left almost immediately to pursue a marketing career in Colorado, while my father, Thomas, and I remained in Washington state. The divorce wasn't particularly ugly, just cold and matter-of-fact, much like my mother's personality. What hurt the most wasn't the divorce itself, but how quickly my mother seemed to forget she had a son at all. During those first few years, there were sporadic phone calls on birthdays and Christmas, with promises of visits that rarely materialized. By the time I was 13, those calls had dwindled to almost nothing. My dad did his best raising me alone, working as an electrical engineer to keep our lives stable. But the real stabilizing force in my childhood was my grandfather Harold, my dad's father. Harold lived just 20 minutes away in a beautiful craftsman home he'd purchased in the 1940s. He'd paid $12,000 for it back then, which seemed like a fortune at the time. Now, in today's market, similar homes in the neighborhood were selling for well over $650,000. But to Harold, it was never about the money. That house was his pride and joy, a place he'd lovingly maintained and enhanced with his own skilled hands for over 60 years. I started spending weekends at Grandpa Harold's house when I was 11. Those weekends became sacred to me. Harold was a retired carpenter whose skilled hands could transform raw lumber into practically anything. His backyard workshop was my favorite place in the world. The scent of sawdust and varnish, the precise organization of his tools, the patient way he'd guide my small hands on a lathe or sander, these memories formed the foundation of who I would become. "Working with your hands connects you to something real," he'd often tell me. "In a world where everything is becoming digital and disposable, creating something tangible that will outlast you is a kind of magic." Harold wasn't just teaching me woodworking. He was teaching me values. Patience. Precision. The importance of creating rather than consuming. The satisfaction of fixing rather than replacing. These lessons shaped me into the structural engineer I eventually became. While I worked primarily with computers and calculations now, I understood buildings in a way my colleagues with purely academic backgrounds never could. I knew how things were actually built, how materials behaved in the real world, not just in theoretical models. 3 years ago, Harold was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim from the start, 6 months at best. My father and I were devastated, but Harold faced his diagnosis with the same steady pragmatism he approached everything. "We all have to return to sawdust someday," he told us with a sad smile. "I've had a good long run." I immediately took a 3-month leave of absence from my firm to help care for him. I installed ramps over the porch steps, converted his ground floor study into a bedroom so he wouldn't have to tackle the stairs, and made countless other modifications to keep him comfortable and independent for as long as possible. Dad visited daily, but with his full-time job, the bulk of Harold's care fell to me. I didn't mind. It felt like the smallest repayment for all he'd given me. During those final months, Harold and I had many long conversations. He spoke often about his house, how he'd bought it after returning from World War II, raised his family there, and watched the neighborhood transform around him while maintaining the home's character. It was clear how much it meant to him that the house stay in the family. "This place has good bones," he'd say, running his increasingly frail hand along the solid oak banister he'd restored decades ago. "Take care of it, and it'll shelter generations to come." Harold lasted 8 months, defying doctors' expectations through sheer willpower, I think. When he finally passed, it was peaceful, with Dad and me at his bedside. The funeral was small, just as he would have wanted. A handful of old friends, some neighbors, a few of my colleagues who'd heard countless stories about my amazing grandfather. And then unexpectedly, my mother showed up. I hadn't seen Laura in nearly 4 years at that point, and before that, only sporadically. She'd remarried and divorced again in Colorado, never had more children, and from what little my dad said, had bounced between marketing jobs. She appeared at the funeral looking oddly out of place, like a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong memorial service. She hugged me awkwardly, told me how sorry she was, and mentioned something about family coming together in times of loss. It rang hollow, but I was too grief-stricken to question her sudden appearance. A week after the funeral came the reading of the will. Harold's lawyer, an elderly man named Frank who'd been his friend for 50 years, gathered Dad, me, and to our surprise, my mother in his wood-paneled office downtown. The will was straightforward. Harold wasn't wealthy, but he'd been prudent. There were modest savings to be divided between local charities. His collection of vintage woodworking tools was left specifically to me. In the house, the beautiful craftsman home with the workshop out back was left entirely to me as well. I'll never forget the words Frank read from Harold's will. "To my grandson Aidan, I leave my home and property at 423 Maple Street. Since the day he started visiting me as a boy, he has shown the same love and respect for this house that I have felt. He has the skills and heart to maintain it properly, and I know he will honor its history while creating his own story within its walls. While others might see only its market value, Aidan sees its soul." I couldn't hold back tears when Frank read those words. Dad squeezed my shoulder, clearly emotional himself but not surprised by the bequest. Laura, however, looked genuinely shocked. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing before she finally found her voice. "But I'm his daughter," she said, addressing Frank rather than looking at my father or me. "Shouldn't the house at least be split between the family members?" Frank adjusted his glasses and responded calmly. "Harold was very specific about his wishes, Mrs. Davis. The will is legally sound and quite clear." Laura's face flushed red, but to my surprise, she quickly composed herself. She turned to me with what appeared to be a genuine smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, that's wonderful for you, Aidan. Dad always did think the world of you." At the time, I thought perhaps she was finally acknowledging the special bond I'd shared with Harold, a relationship she'd never fostered with her own father. I was wrong. So very wrong. 2 months after the funeral, I was still deep in grief while trying to maintain my full-time job. The firm had been understanding about my leave of absence during Harold's illness, but now I needed to focus on several major projects that had been piling up. I was grateful for the distraction, though coming home to Grandpa's house, now my house, each evening was still an emotional experience. I hadn't changed much yet. His coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter where he'd last placed it. His reading glasses perched on top of a half-finished woodworking magazine beside his favorite armchair. I wasn't ready to erase these small traces of his presence. It was around this time that Laura began visiting. The first time she showed up on a Saturday afternoon, I was genuinely surprised. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad since the funeral," she explained, standing awkwardly on the porch. "I realized I missed out on so much of his life. I thought maybe spending some time in his home might help me feel closer to him, process my grief." It sounded reasonable enough, and despite our distant relationship, she was still my mother. I invited her in, made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table where Harold and I had shared so many meals. The conversation was strained but civil. She asked questions about Harold's final months, about memories I had of him that she'd missed by being absent. I answered honestly, without accusation. These visits became a weekly occurrence. I noticed she began bringing small possessions with her, a vase she placed on the mantel, framed photos of herself, a throw blanket for the couch. "Just brightening the place up a bit," she said when I mentioned it. "And it's convenient to store a few things here while I'm between apartments." That caught my attention. "You're moving to Washington." "Just temporarily," she assured me. "Taking stock of my life after the divorce, reconnecting with family." "You understand." I did want to understand. Some part of me, maybe the little boy who'd been abandoned, wanted to believe my mother was genuinely trying to reconnect with me, that Harold's death had awakened some dormant maternal instinct. About a month into these visits, I started dating Jessica, a landscape architect I'd met through work. Smart, creative, and straightforward, Jessica quickly became an important part of my life. The first time she met Laura, I could tell immediately that Jessica was wary of my mother's sudden involvement in my life. "There's something off about the way she looks at this house," Jessica told me afterward. She wasn't admiring the craftsman details or asking about its history. She was assessing it like an appraiser. I brushed off her concerns. "She's just trying to connect with her dad's memory. We're finally building some kind of relationship." Jessica wasn't convinced. "I noticed her taking photos of rooms when you were getting drinks. And did you see how she was pacing off the dimensions of the living room?" "She mentioned she's into interior design now," I defended, though I had to admit it seemed odd. My willful blindness came to an abrupt end one Tuesday afternoon when I came home early from work to find an unfamiliar car in the driveway. Inside, I discovered Laura showing a man in a suit around the living room. "Aiden," she said, clearly startled by my appearance. "I thought you'd be at work until 6. "Meeting got canceled," I replied, eyeing the stranger. "What's going on?" The man stepped forward with a business card. "Blake Wilson, Pacific Northwest Appraisals," he introduced himself. "Your mother asked for a preliminary property valuation." I turned to Laura, confused. "Why would you do that?" She laughed lightly, touching my arm in a way that felt patronizing. "Just curious about property values in the neighborhood. Dad always used to talk about how much his investment had grown over the years." After the appraiser left, I confronted her more directly. "You should have asked me before bringing a stranger into my home." "Our family home," she corrected smoothly. "I'm just looking out for your interests, sweetheart. Do you have any idea how much capital you have tied up in this place? In this market, you could sell, buy something more suitable for a young man, and still have hundreds of thousands for investment." I was stunned by her presumption. "I'm not selling. This house means everything to me and to Grandpa Harold. That's why he left it to me specifically." Laura's expression tightened momentarily before she forced a smile. "Of course, honey. It's completely your decision. I just want you to know all your options." The following weekend, in what I now recognize as a manipulative tactic, Laura suggested a family dinner. She cooked Harold's favorite pot roast recipe, set the table with his dishes, and invited my dad to join us. Dad, who'd remained cordial with Laura despite their divorce, agreed to come for my sake. The meal started pleasantly enough, with reminiscing about Harold. Then Laura skillfully redirected the conversation. "I've been thinking about what would be most fair for everyone," she began, refilling our wine glasses. "This house represents such a significant portion of Dad's estate. Wouldn't it make sense to sell it and divide the proceeds more equitably among the family? Then Aiden wouldn't be burdened with maintaining such an old home, and we'd all benefit from Dad's legacy." My father frowned. Laura, Harold was explicit about his wishes. "The house goes to Aiden, period." "I understand that legally," she replied, her voice taking on a harder edge despite her smile. "I'm talking about what's right. I was his daughter for 45 years. A daughter who rarely visited and called even less," my father said quietly. I intervened before things escalated. "I have no intention of selling. I'm going to maintain Harold's workshop and eventually raise my own family here. That's what he wanted, and it's what I want too." Laura pursed her lips. "That's a lot of sentimental attachment to an outdated house. You're wasting its potential and, frankly, wasting Dad's investment." The dinner deteriorated from there, with Laura becoming increasingly passive-aggressive. Dad left early and Laura followed shortly after, claiming a headache. As I cleared the dishes alone, I felt the first real stirrings of unease about my mother's intentions. Those concerns deepened the following week when I came home to find furniture rearranged and several of Harold's personal items missing from the shelves. When I called Laura to ask about it, she claimed she was just decluttering a bit and had taken some old things to donate. "You can't just take things from my house," I told her firmly. "Don't be so territorial, Aiden. I'm helping improve the place. Those old knickknacks were just collecting dust." While searching for a specific book of Harold's the next day, I opened a kitchen drawer and found a business card for Eileen Sanchez, luxury real estate agent, with Laura's name scrawled on the back along with a note. "Call me when you're ready to list. Can get $750K in current market." I immediately called my dad for advice. He sighed heavily when I described Laura's behavior. "I hate to say this, son, but your mother might be planning something. She's always been resourceful when it comes to getting what she wants. And she's never been sentimental about things that matter to other people. But what can she possibly do? The house is legally mine. Just be careful," he warned. "And maybe consult with Frank about protecting your interests." I should have taken his warning more seriously. Instead, I still wanted to believe my mother was capable of genuine connection, that she wouldn't actively try to undermine me. It was a costly mistake. Over the next few weeks, Laura's behavior became increasingly intrusive. She brought in new curtains, a coffee table, and even had a delivery service bring a new refrigerator as a gift without consulting me. When I came home one Friday to find painters recoloring my living room from Harold's warm amber to a stark modern white, I finally reached my breaking point. "This has to stop," I told her firmly after sending the painters away. "You can't keep changing things in my home without permission. This isn't your house." Laura set down her coffee cup with deliberate slowness. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about this property, Aiden." "There's no misunderstanding. Harold left the house to me. It's in the will." "What's on paper doesn't always reflect real agreements," she said, her voice taking on a hardness I'd rarely heard. "Dad verbally promised me years ago that the house would be mine eventually. He only put your name in the will because I was living out of state at the time, and he knew I'd do the sensible thing and sell it." I stared at her, genuinely shocked. "That's absolutely not true. Harold and I talked extensively about this house during his illness. He was very clear about wanting me to live here to maintain his workshop, to keep it in the family. You were his caregiver at the end when he wasn't thinking clearly," she countered. "It was easy for you to influence him." The accusation stung deeply. I would never manipulate Harold. He made his wishes clear to everyone, including his lawyer. Our argument ended in a stalemate, but it marked a turning point. The pretense of mother-son reconnection had been dropped, revealing Laura's true motivation. She wanted the house, or more accurately, the money from selling it. The next day, on Jessica's advice, I consulted with her friend Anthony, who specialized in real estate law. Over coffee at a downtown cafe, I explained the situation. "Legally, you're on solid ground as the will's beneficiary," Anthony assured me. "But that doesn't mean your mother can't cause problems. Has she taken any steps toward trying to sell the property?" "Not that I know of," I replied. "She couldn't sell it without my signature, right?" Anthony looked troubled. "Generally, no. But I've seen cases where family members have forged documents or claimed verbal agreements that clouded property titles. It creates legal headaches even when the rightful owner prevails." He advised me to secure all property documents and monitor the situation closely. On my way home, my neighbor Walter, a retiree who'd been friends with Harold, waved me over to his porch. "Been meaning to talk to you, Aiden," he said, offering me a seat. "Your mother's been telling folks she's helping you manage the property because you're too busy with work to handle it. Said you might be looking to sell soon." My stomach dropped. "That's completely false, Walter. I have no plans to sell ever." Walter nodded. "Figured as much. Harold always said you'd be the one to keep the old place going. Just thought you should know what she's saying around the neighborhood." That evening, I installed a security camera at the front door, linked to an app on my phone. Jessica helped me set it up, her concern evident. "I know she's your mother, Aiden, but I don't trust her intentions at all," she said as we tested the system. "My parents went through something similar with my uncle after my grandmother died. Family and inheritance can bring out the worst in people." A week later, the camera proved its worth. While reviewing footage from a day I'd been at work, I saw Laura arriving with a man I didn't recognize. Using the audio feature, I could hear their conversation on the porch. "This is it, Martin," Laura was saying. "4 bedrooms, original woodwork throughout. The lot alone is worth a fortune in this market. Development potential," the man, apparently her brother Martin, whom I'd never met, asked. "Absolutely. The workshop could be demolished for a garden apartment. With the right contractor, we could split this into luxury condos and double the return." I felt physically ill listening to them discuss dismantling Harold's beloved home, treating his workshop where we'd spent countless hours together as nothing but square footage to be converted for profit. Further research revealed that Martin worked with Emerald City Property Development, a company known for buying historic homes, gutting them, and converting them to multi-unit properties or tearing them down completely for new construction. The next discovery came from Jessica, who'd been researching Martin's company. "They specialize in quick flips of older homes," she told me. "Buy, renovate minimally with cheap materials, sell for maximum profit. They've got complaints filed against them for cutting corners and ignoring permit requirements." The camera footage over the next 2 weeks showed Laura bringing various strangers through the house while I was at work, people in business attire carrying clipboards and measuring tools. I recognized one as the real estate agent whose card I'd found. I'd had enough. The next time Laura came over, I confronted her directly. "You need to give me back my key," I said without preamble. "I know you've been bringing real estate agents and developers through my house without permission." Laura's expression flickered between surprise and defiance before settling on wounded innocence. "I was just getting opinions, Aiden. You're being completely paranoid." "It's not paranoia when I have video footage," I countered, showing her the security app on my phone. "You told a developer my grandfather's workshop could be demolished. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" Her eyes welled with tears, a manipulation tactic I'd seen rarely but recognized from childhood. "I'm just trying to help you understand the options. This house is too much responsibility for someone your age. I'm thinking of your future." "No, you're thinking of yourself," I replied, holding out my hand. "The key, please." After a prolonged, tearful scene where she accused me of being ungrateful and suspicious, Laura finally surrendered the key. As she was leaving, she turned at the door. "I'm sorry you feel this way. I only want what's best for our family." Against my better judgment and despite Jessica's warnings, I softened slightly. "I know we have different views of what that means. I just need you to respect that this is my home now, and these boundary violations have to stop." She nodded, seeming contrite. "I understand. Maybe we could start fresh. Dinner next weekend." I agreed, wanting to believe we could salvage some kind of relationship. 2 days later, I discovered that several of Harold's most valuable hand-crafted tools were missing from the workshop, including a 19th-century hand plane he'd lovingly restored and a set of Japanese chisels that had been a retirement gift from his colleagues. When I called Laura about the missing tools, she denied all knowledge, suggesting I might have misplaced them or that one of those workmen might have taken them. By then, I knew better than to believe her. What I didn't know was that the worst betrayal was yet to come. 3 weeks after our confrontation, I was scheduled for a work trip to oversee a challenging project in Portland. It was only supposed to last 5 days, Monday through Friday. Before leaving, I double-checked all locks and reinforced the security system with additional cameras in the backyard and workshop. "Text me if you see anything suspicious on the cameras," I asked Jessica, who had access to the security app. I don't trust Laura to respect boundaries while I'm gone. For the first 4 days, everything seemed normal. The security footage showed regular mail delivery, the occasional neighbor walking by, but no sign of Laura or her associates. I checked in with Jessica each evening, and she reported nothing unusual. On Thursday evening, however, I received a concerned call from Jessica. "The security system went offline about an hour ago," she said. "I can't access any of the cameras." My immediate thought was a power outage or internet disruption, but a quick check with the utility companies confirmed services were operating normally in the neighborhood. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. "I'm coming back early," I told Jessica. "Something doesn't feel right." I managed to get on a late flight back to Washington that night, arriving home around 1 in the morning on Friday. The sight that greeted me sent ice through my veins. New deadbolts on all doors, windows with unfamiliar blinds, and a real estate sign staked in the front yard reading "under contract" in bold red letters. I ran to the front door and tried my key. As I feared, it no longer worked. I pounded on the door, my heart racing with panic and rage. After several minutes, lights came on inside, and Laura's voice came through the door. "Aiden, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Portland until tomorrow." "Open the door right now," I demanded, still knocking. "What have you done to my house?" There was a pause, then I heard another voice, a man's. More muffled discussion. Finally, Laura spoke again, her tone chillingly calm. "This isn't your house anymore, Aiden. You have nothing here. Please leave before we have to call the police for trespassing." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? This is my house. Grandpa left it to me. You can't just take it." "We have documentation showing the property was transferred to me before Dad's death," Laura replied. "The sale is already in process. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is illegal. You're committing fraud." "Go away, Aiden," came the cold response. Then I heard her brother Martin's voice add, "We've already spoken with local law enforcement about a disturbed relative making false claims. Don't embarrass yourself." Shaking with adrenaline, I called the police. When 2 officers arrived 20 minutes later, Laura and Martin presented them with what appeared to be legitimate-looking paperwork showing Laura as the property owner. I showed them the will and deed on my phone, but the officers said it was beyond their authority to determine ownership. "This appears to be a civil matter, sir," one officer told me sympathetically. "Without a court order, we can't forcibly remove people claiming ownership with documentation." "But they changed the locks on my house while I was away," I protested. "I understand your frustration, but ownership disputes require legal resolution. I suggest contacting an attorney immediately." Laura watched from the doorway, a cold smile playing at her lips as the police advised me to leave the property until the matter could be resolved legally. With no alternative, I retreated to my car and called Jessica in tears. "They've locked me out of my own home," I choked out. "They're claiming Grandpa transferred ownership to her before he died." "It's a complete lie." Jessica immediately offered her apartment as a place to stay. "We'll fight this, Aiden. What they're doing has to be illegal." The next morning, through a real estate contact of Jessica's, we discovered the horrifying truth. The house was listed for a quick sale at $590,000, well below the market value of $750,000. The listing described it as a motivated seller situation with cash offers only and an expedited closing process. "They're rushing this through to get cash before you can legally stop them," Jessica's friend explained. "It's a classic fraudulent transfer technique. They find a buyer willing to overlook potential title issues in exchange for a below-market price." Further investigation revealed Laura had submitted altered documents to the county recorder's office, backdating a quitclaim deed that supposedly transferred ownership from Harold to her a year before his death. The document looked legitimate at first glance, with what appeared to be Harold's signature and a notary stamp. I broke down completely when I saw the forged document. How could she do this? She's my mother. This was my grandfather's legacy to me. It's all I have left of him. Jessica held me as I sobbed, my entire world seemingly collapsing around me. Not only had I lost my home and all my possessions inside, but the betrayal by my own mother cut deeper than I could have imagined. The workshop where Harold and I had spent so many meaningful hours together, the home where I'd cared for him in his final months, all of it taken through calculated deception. "We're not giving up," Jessica said firmly when my tears finally subsided. "What she's doing is criminal fraud. We're going to fight back and we're going to win." In that moment of complete devastation, Jessica's unwavering support became my lifeline. While I felt utterly betrayed by family, her steadfast presence reminded me that there were still people I could trust. Together, we began researching attorneys who specialized in property fraud and inheritance disputes. By that evening, my shock had hardened into resolve. Laura had underestimated me if she thought I would simply walk away from Harold's legacy without a fight. I might have been temporarily locked out of my home, but I was far from defeated. The Monday following my lockout, Jessica and I met with attorney William Parker, who specialized in property disputes and inheritance fraud. His office was modern and sleek, a sharp contrast to his old-school, methodical approach. He listened intently as I explained the situation, occasionally stopping me to ask for specific details about dates and documentation. "What your mother has done is called creating a clouded title," Parker explained after I finished. "She's filed fraudulent documents to create confusion about who legally owns the property, allowing her to sell it quickly to an unsuspecting buyer, or more likely, to a buyer willing to overlook potential issues for a discounted price." "Can't we just show them the will proving the house belongs to me?" I asked. Parker shook his head. "It's not quite that simple. Once a title is clouded with competing claims, it requires legal intervention to clear. The good news is that fraudulent transfers can absolutely be invalidated, but we need to act quickly before the sale completes." He outlined the process. "We would file for an emergency injunction to halt any sale or transfer of the property, submit evidence of the fraudulent documentation, and petition the court to affirm my ownership based on Harold's will." The bad news was that legal proceedings would take time, possibly months. "In the meantime, where am I supposed to live?" "All my possessions are in that house," I said, the reality of my situation sinking in deeper. "We'll include an emergency motion for access to retrieve essential personal items," Parker assured me. "Courts are generally sympathetic in cases like these." As we were finishing our meeting, my phone rang. It was my father, Thomas. "I just got into town," he said. "Jessica told me what happened. I'm at her apartment now, waiting for you." I hadn't told my father about the lockout yet, not wanting to worry him, but Jessica had taken the initiative. When we arrived at her apartment, Dad embraced me with a fierceness that broke through my carefully maintained composure. "I'm so sorry, Aiden. I should have warned you more clearly about what Laura might be capable of." Over dinner, Dad shared insights about Laura that helped piece together her motivation. "She's always been financially irresponsible. During our marriage, she racked up credit card debt I didn't know about until collectors started calling. After the divorce, she borrowed against her retirement twice that I know of." "But why now?" I asked. "Why come after Harold's house after all these years of having minimal contact?" Dad sighed. "I heard through mutual friends that her interior design business in Colorado failed last year. She invested everything in it and lost it all. She's probably desperate for money." This information prompted Jessica to do more digging into Laura's financial situation. Through public records, we discovered Laura had a tax lien against her for $34,000 and had recently been sued by a business partner for misappropriation of funds. Meanwhile, I researched Martin's connection more thoroughly. His property development company had a troubling history. Multiple complaints with the Better Business Bureau, 2 lawsuits for permit violations, and a pattern of buying properties from vulnerable sellers at below-market rates. "He gets a finder's fee or commission for bringing properties to the development company," I explained to Parker during our next meeting. "He's probably promised Laura quick cash if she can deliver my house." Parker nodded grimly. "That fits the pattern. The question is, how far will they go to complete this sale?" Jessica had been thoughtfully quiet during this discussion, but suddenly straightened. Wait, Aiden, didn't you mention once that Harold had a hidden safe in the workshop? The memory clicked into place. Yes. Behind a false panel in the lumber storage cabinet. He showed it to me years ago, said it was where he kept his most important documents. Laura wouldn't know about that, my father confirmed. Harold was old school about security, never trusted banks completely. A plan began to form. Harold's workshop had a separate entrance through the cellar, accessed via bulkhead doors on the side of the house. It was rarely used and partially concealed by landscaping. If Laura and Martin didn't know about it, I might be able to access the workshop and retrieve crucial documents from the safe. It's risky, Parker cautioned when I proposed the idea. Technically, entering the property while ownership is in dispute could be construed as trespassing. It's my house, I insisted. And we need more evidence to strengthen our case. While this plan was developing, Jessica made another critical discovery. Using her professional contacts, she found that Martin's development company had previously been investigated for fraudulent property transfers, though charges were ultimately dropped when the victims settled out of court. They have a pattern of targeting properties owned by elderly people or recent inheritors, she explained, showing us the newspaper articles she'd found. They create document confusion, rush through cash sales, then disappear before legal consequences catch up. Armed with this information, Parker prepared our legal strategy. He filed an emergency injunction to halt any sale of the property, citing the fraudulent quitclaim deed. He also submitted a petition to have the deed declared invalid based on evidence that Harold was hospitalized on the date it was supposedly signed. The court date is set for 3 weeks from now, Parker informed us. In the meantime, I've sent formal notices to the title company and the real estate agency handling the sale, informing them of the disputed ownership. Will that be enough to stop the sale? I asked anxiously. It creates significant liability for them if they proceed, Parker explained. No legitimate title company wants to insure a property with ownership disputes. While the legal wheels were turning, I couldn't sleep. The thought of Laura and Martin potentially emptying the house of Harold's belongings or, worse, damaging his beloved workshop haunted me. Jessica noticed my deteriorating state. You need to get into that safe, she said decisively. Not just for the documents, but for your peace of mind. We'll go tonight. Under cover of darkness, Jessica, my father, and I approached the house from the back alley. The security cameras I'd installed had been removed, but Laura hadn't changed the padlock on the old cellar doors, probably not even knowing they existed. With trembling hands, I used the key Harold had given me years ago. Be careful, my father whispered as I descended the creaky wooden steps into the darkness. We'll keep watch out here. The musty scent of the cellar brought back childhood memories, both comforting and painful in the current context. I navigated the maze of storage shelves with only my phone flashlight for illumination, careful to avoid making noise that might alert Laura or Martin upstairs. At the back of the cellar, a narrow staircase led directly to Harold's workshop. I paused at the top, listening for any sounds of occupation. Hearing nothing, I slowly opened the door. The workshop looked different. Many of the tools were missing, workbenches pushed against walls, and several lumber storage racks emptied completely. My heart sank seeing Harold's sacred space so disrupted, but I forced myself to focus on the task at hand. The false panel hiding the safe was in the back corner, behind a large cabinet of specialized woodworking tools. I carefully moved several boxes that had been stacked in front of it, wincing at each small sound in the quiet night. Finally, I accessed the hidden compartment. The wall safe was small but solidly built, with a combination lock that Harold had set to his birth date. With sweaty fingers, I turned the dial. 16 right, 34 left, 19 right. The lock clicked open on the first try. Inside was exactly what I'd hoped to find. A folder containing the original will, handwritten notes from Harold about his intentions for the property, and most importantly, a journal documenting conversations with Laura over the years. I quickly photographed each page with my phone, my hands shaking with adrenaline and emotion. The journal entries were illuminating. Harold had documented multiple occasions when Laura had asked for money, suggested he sell the house to enjoy his retirement, and even once explicitly asked him to leave the property to her instead of me. Each time he had refused, explaining his reasons for wanting the house to stay with someone who would preserve its character and his workshop. Even more damning, I found a small bundle of letters from Laura spanning the past decade. In them, she repeatedly asked Harold for loans, complained about financial difficulties, and in one particularly painful letter dated just 2 years ago, suggested he was wasting his biggest asset by not selling the house and giving her what she called her rightful portion. Harold had kept it all, perhaps sensing these records might someday be needed. In addition to the documentation, the safe contained several family heirlooms. His father's pocket watch, my grandmother's wedding ring, and a small wooden box containing childhood memorabilia he'd saved from my early years. I carefully photographed everything, then placed the original will and the most damning letters into a manila envelope I'd brought. The rest I returned to the safe, not wanting Laura to discover it had been accessed if she happened to know about it. As I was preparing to leave, a final discovery stopped me cold. In a desk drawer, I found architectural plans drafted by Martin's development company, dated 2 months ago, showing Harold's house converted into 4 separate condominium units. The workshop was labeled for demolition, replaced by a luxury garden apartment. The betrayal felt physical, like a blow to my chest. After carefully restoring the workshop to its disturbed state, I made my way back through the cellar and out to where Jessica and my father waited anxiously. "Got everything," I whispered, clutching the envelope. "And more." Back at Jessica's apartment, we examined the evidence thoroughly. The journal and letters provided clear proof that Harold had consistently refused Laura's requests regarding the house, directly contradicting her claim that he had promised it to her. The original will, safely in our possession now, would be difficult for Laura to challenge. At 6 the next morning, we met with William Parker at his office, presenting our findings. His expression grew increasingly confident as he reviewed the materials. "This is exactly what we needed," he said, carefully examining the journal entries. "Harold's documentation of Laura's requests and his refusals directly contradicts her claim of a verbal agreement. The original will with witnesses' signatures further strengthens our case." Parker immediately filed an emergency injunction with the court, attaching copies of our new evidence. He also sent formal legal notices to the title company, real estate agency, developer, and potential buyers, warning them of potential legal liability if they proceeded with a sale. "No legitimate business will touch this property now that they've been formally notified of fraudulent documentation," Parker assured us. "The liability would be enormous." He was right. By mid-afternoon, we received word that the title company had refused to proceed with the transaction, citing serious concerns about chain of ownership. An hour later, Martin's development company withdrew their offer, unwilling to risk legal complications. The real momentum shift came that evening when my phone began buzzing with calls from a number I didn't recognize. When I finally answered, it was a panicked attorney representing the development company. "Mr. Hughes, I'm calling about the property on Maple Street," the man said tensely. "Our client was not made aware of any ownership disputes when they entered into contract. We've received your attorney's notice and documentation." "The ownership is not in dispute," I replied firmly. "The house belongs to me. Your client has been dealing with someone using fraudulent documents." "We understand that may be the case now," the lawyer said carefully. "My client wishes to avoid any involvement in a potentially complicated situation. They're prepared to withdraw completely from any purchase agreement." It was the first victory, but not the end of the battle. Laura began calling and texting incessantly, her messages swinging wildly between threats and attempts at reconciliation. "You're making a terrible mistake," one message read. "My lawyers will destroy you." An hour later, "Can't we talk about this, sweetheart? I'm sure we can work something out that benefits us both." I didn't respond to any of them, following Parker's strict advice to avoid direct communication. Instead, we prepared for a strategic meeting with all relevant attorneys the following day. The meeting took place in Parker's conference room. Laura and Martin arrived with their lawyer, a nervous-looking younger man who seemed uncomfortable with the situation. The developer sent their corporate counsel, and representatives from the title company and real estate agency attended remotely. Parker methodically presented our evidence. Harold's original will, the journal documenting Laura's previous attempts to gain control of the property, the letters showing her financial motivations, and expert analysis demonstrating the quitclaim deed's signature had been forged. My client is prepared to pursue this matter to its full legal conclusion, Parker stated calmly. That includes criminal charges for document fraud, forgery, attempted real estate fraud, and potentially elder abuse related to the forged transfer during Harold Hughes' terminal illness. Laura's face had grown increasingly pale during the presentation. Martin looked angrily at his sister, clearly blaming her for the situation. Their lawyer requested a brief recess to confer with his clients. When they returned, the attorney cleared his throat uncomfortably. My clients wish to resolve this matter without protracted litigation. They're prepared to acknowledge Mr. Aidan Hughes' ownership and withdraw all claims to the property. The developer's lawyer interjected. Our company will be seeking damages from Mrs. Davis for misrepresentation that has damaged our reputation and caused significant wasted resources. And the title company will be reviewing all recent transactions involving Mrs. Davis or Mr. Kelly for potential fraudulent activity, added their representative. Laura finally spoke, her voice shaking. Aidan, please. You can't do this to me. I'm your mother. You locked me out of my own home, I replied evenly. You forged documents to steal my grandfather's house. You were going to sell it out from under me and destroy his workshop. What kind of mother does that? After another private consultation, Laura's lawyer returned with their terms. Laura would surrender all keys immediately, remove her possessions within 48 hours under supervision, and sign a formal acknowledgement that she had no ownership claim to the property. Parker added our conditions. Laura would never again enter the property without explicit written permission, would make no future claims against Harold's estate, and would provide a full accounting of any items removed from the house since Harold's death. 2 days later, I stood on the front porch of my grandfather's house, watching as Laura and Martin loaded the last of her belongings into a rental truck. As they prepared to leave, Laura approached me, her expression a complex mixture of anger, shame, and what might have been genuine regret. I was desperate, she said quietly. After the business failed, I lost everything. When I saw how valuable Dad's house had become, I convinced myself I deserved a share. You could have just asked for help, I replied. Instead of trying to steal everything. Martin hung back, looking uncomfortable. For what it's worth, I told her this was going too far. The plan was just to pressure you into selling and splitting proceeds, not all this. I didn't respond. No explanation could justify what they had attempted to do. As they drove away, I felt an overwhelming sense of both victory and exhaustion. The house was mine again, legally secured, but the emotional toll had been immense. Jessica joined me on the porch, slipping her hand into mine. Ready to go home. For the first time in weeks, I smiled genuinely. More than ready. The legal aftermath continued for several months. The court formally invalidated the fraudulent quitclaim deed and confirmed my ownership based on Harold's will. The title was cleared of all clouds, and additional legal protections were put in place to prevent any similar attempts in the future. I had the option to pursue criminal charges against Laura for the forgery and fraud. William Parker presented the case plainly. We had enough evidence for a conviction that would likely result in jail time. After much soul-searching and lengthy discussions with Jessica and my father, I ultimately decided against it. She's still my mother, I explained to Parker when informing him of my decision. Destroying her life won't bring back what she took from me emotionally. And legally, I've already won. Instead, I focused on reclaiming my home. I changed every lock, installed an extensive security system, and began the process of assessing what had been taken during Laura's occupation. Many of Harold's tools were missing permanently, likely sold. Some furniture had been removed or damaged. The beautiful amber paint had been covered with stark white in several rooms. The worst damage was to the workshop. Laura and Martin had begun dismantling the custom storage systems Harold had built, presumably to make the space more marketable to developers. The specialized workbenches had been pushed aside, and several built-in features had been ripped out completely. Jessica spent countless hours helping me clean and reclaim the spaces. My father drove down on weekends to assist with more complex repairs. Slowly, the house began to feel like home again, though the sense of violation lingered. "It's like healing from a physical injury," Jessica observed one evening as we sanded down gouges in Harold's workbench. "The pain fades gradually, but you never forget it happened." 3 weeks after reclaiming the house, I made an unexpected discovery while cleaning out a storage closet that had been partially emptied. Behind a stack of old magazines was a wooden box I'd never seen before, with my name carved into the lid in Harold's distinctive style. Inside were dozens of family photographs, arranged chronologically. Pictures of my father as a boy, my parents' wedding, my own baby photos, and continuing through my childhood. Most surprisingly, there were photos of Laura with me as a toddler, looking genuinely happy and maternal, something I had few memories of. Harold had carefully preserved this visual history of our family, including the good moments with the mother who would later betray us both. There was also a letter addressed to me in Harold's handwriting, dated just weeks before his death. In it, he shared wisdom I desperately needed in that moment. "Family is complicated, Aiden. People can love each other and still hurt each other deeply. Your mother has made many mistakes, but remember there was good in her too, once. Whatever happens after I'm gone, don't let bitterness consume you. Stand firm for what's right, but don't let resentment steal your joy. That's letting them hurt you twice." Those words prompted deep reflection about cycles of family hurt. Laura had grown up with a loving but stern father who had disappointed her by leaving his house to me instead of her. Rather than accepting his wishes, she had allowed resentment and financial desperation to drive her to betrayal. If I held onto rage against her, was I perpetuating that same cycle? After discussing it with my father, I made a difficult decision. Using some savings, I sent Laura $10,000, not as an obligation but as a gesture of humanity. The accompanying note was brief. "This doesn't erase what happened, but Grandpa Harold wouldn't want you destitute. Please seek help for your financial issues. This is the final contact between us for now." Laura sent a tearful voicemail in response, a mixture of gratitude and what seemed like genuine remorse. I didn't reply, needing the distance to heal, but it felt like closing a painful chapter appropriately. Over the following months, Jessica and I grew closer through the shared experience. She eventually moved in, bringing her love of gardening to Harold's somewhat neglected yard. Together, we began restoring the workshop to its former glory, with Jessica designing beautiful storage solutions that honored Harold's craftsmanship while adding modern efficiency. 6 months after the lockout, I launched weekend woodworking classes for neighborhood kids in Harold's workshop. It felt like the perfect way to honor his memory, passing on his skills and values to a new generation. The joy on the children's faces as they completed their first small projects reminded me of my own childhood experiences with Harold. Through this painful ordeal, I learned profound lessons about family, boundaries, and resilience. I discovered that standing up for yourself doesn't have to mean losing your humanity. That forgiveness isn't about excusing harmful actions but freeing yourself from their ongoing power over you. That inheritance isn't just about property or possessions, but about carrying forward values and wisdom from those we've lost. I still have moments of anger when I think about how easily Laura was willing to erase Harold's legacy for quick profit. But those moments grow less frequent as I focus on building something positive from the experience. Each time I teach a child how to safely use a hand plane in Harold's workshop, Each time Jessica and I enjoy dinner in the dining room where I once cared for my grandfather, I'm honoring his true legacy. Perhaps the most important lesson was learning that while family can hurt you deeply, family is also what you create. The community I've built around this home, from Jessica to the neighborhood kids learning woodworking to my father's renewed presence in my life, this is the family that matters most. As I run my hand along the workshop bench that Harold and I restored together years ago, I often think about what he would make of everything that happened. I think he would be sad but not surprised by Laura's actions. More importantly, I think he would be proud of how I protected his legacy while finding a path forward that doesn't perpetuate bitterness. In the end, the house isn't just structure and property value. It's a vessel for memories, skills passed down, lessons learned, and new memories being created every day. That's what Laura could never understand, and what I'll never forget. Have you ever had to protect something important to you from someone you once trusted? Share your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's listed in a will, but the values and lessons that help us navigate life's hardest moments. Thank you for listening to my story.